Greetings. My name is Dr. Brendan KINSELLA, and I currently serve as professor of piano at the University of Texas-Rio Grande Valley School of Music, where I teach applied piano, chamber music, piano literature, and piano pedagogy. I would first like to thank the selection committee for choosing this presentation on Julius Eastman. This topic is not only relevant to us as musicians because, first and foremost, Eastman's music is of a very high quality and is worthy of being performed more frequently, but also because the content of the music and Eastman's biography fit squarely into the broad discussions of race, equality, and social upheaval in modern times. However, I would like to issue a trigger warning on the content of this presentation. The topics herein include, among other things, substance abuse, racism, systemic discrimination, and mental health. While none of the content is graphic or indecent, I strongly encourage you to stop watching right now if you feel like you cannot deal with these complicated issues. I would also like to issue one more statement regarding the titles of Eastman's music. One of the core components of this presentation is how, in the right context and with appropriate dialogue between performers, the community, and arts organizations, one can effectively program his supremely challenging music with the full titles on display, as I have done for this particular festival. In addition to that, I find that a short exploration of Julius Eastman's output for all of his ensembles and solo works will reveal that he himself believed that these titles were necessary to conveying his artistic message as a composer and a performer. Nonetheless, once again, if you feel that these topics are too difficult for you to process, then by all means, do not watch this presentation. Also, regarding the title of the work in question, I will not say it. However, it is Eastman's title, and it will be referenced in the program. I'd like to begin my presentation by sharing with you how I first discovered Julius Eastman's music and why I chose to study it. While a doctoral student at the UMKC Conservatory of Music, I took a survey course on contemporary music after 1950. Since my undergraduate studies, I was interested in new music, relished the opportunity to work with composers, and found myself comfortable in repertoire that had fewer champions than, for example, standard repertoire. As someone who loves minimalism, regularly performs it, and believes in it as a musical genre, many of the names were familiar to me in this course that I took. Philip Glass, Steve Reich, John Adams, and Alvin Lucier, for example. Also included on the list was a name that was new to me, Julius Eastman. As expected, we studied works such as Glass's Koyaanisqatsi, Steve Reich's many phase pieces, Adams's Phrygian Gates, and Lucier's I Am Sitting in a Room. One of the things that I love about minimalism was its ability to put the listener into sort of a trance or a meditative state, where even the slightest change in a recurring pattern could elicit a new state of awareness or a new emotional response from the audience. When we began to study Eastman's music, I had an entirely different reaction. Before the instructor told us about his biography or revealing the titles of his work, he played a recording of one of Eastman's pieces for multiple pianos that you will hear today. The effect that his music had on me was immediate and direct. This was the literal opposite of the style of minimalism that I had grown accustomed to, and I was gripped by its intensity, its incessant energy, and its rhythmic drive. It possessed a ferocity that I had never heard in other composers from the genre, and also in most other parts of the repertoire. My first reaction was to program it on my next doctoral chamber music recital. After listening to this short excerpt, the instructor then told us the title of the piece, which was greeted by stunned silence. And he then went into further detail regarding Eastman's biography. At that point, I knew that programming his music would be an immense challenge in every aspect, from finding willing participants to perhaps even the institution giving approval for such a work to be performed. Although I abandoned the idea of performing it at the time, his music always stayed with me, and I was eager to find an opportunity to program it. In the next segment of my presentation, I would briefly like to discuss Eastman's biography and introduce basic aspects of his musical style. Born in 1940 in Ithaca, New York, and raised by a single mother, Julius Eastman displayed considerable music prowess from an early age, excelling as a pianist, a composer, and a singer. He first attended Ithaca College in his hometown and eventually enrolled as a piano performance major at the Curtis Institute of Music, where he graduated in 1963 with honors. During his time at Curtis, Eastman was known for his eccentricity and his wide-ranging musical styles that perhaps did not fit in with the establishment teaching style. His younger brother Jerry was a jazz musician, and their relationship as brothers and fellow musicians led to frequent inclusion of popular styles into Eastman's music, notably in its rhythmic drive, its use of ostinato, as well as short repeated patterns that one would see in jazz forms such as boogie-woogie and other largely tonal musical languages. Upon graduation from Curtis, Eastman seemed bound for success as a performing artist, even if his compositions had not yet begun to reach the mainstream, possibly due to racism, as Isaac Jean-François suggests in his article, Julius Eastman, Minimal Music. His credits during this time include appearances with Pierre Boulez in a rare performance of Peter Maxwell Davies' 8 Songs for a Mad King, where both his skills as an avant-garde vocalist and the theatrical nature of his personality helped publicize the work. Eastman also earned several important fellowships at a variety of institutions and memberships with prestigious new music and performing ensembles, such as SUNY Buffalo, Northwestern University, the SEM Ensemble, and the Brooklyn Philharmonia, among many others. Additionally, he was regularly in the company of new music luminaries such as Meredith Monk, Morton Feldman, and famously earned the ire of John Cage for Eastman's fierce advocacy on homosexual rights. In short, he was gaining recognition as an engaging and reliable performer of new music in many styles, although his compositions were not earning him the same recognition. To Eastman, the disparity between being successful as a new music performer while simultaneously having your compositions so solidly rejected by the establishment was irreconcilable. As his success as a performing artist waned in the 1980s, his years-long struggle with substance abuse worsened. His hopes for a teaching position never materialized, and he was evicted from his home in New York City, which tragically resulted in many of his scores being discarded or confiscated along with his personal belongings. Sadly, he died on May 28, 1990, in Buffalo at the age of 49. Little is known about the circumstances towards the end of his life, other than the fact that he was homeless for an extended period and that he was off the grid. He and his works largely lay forgotten until the tireless research and advocacy of composer Mary Jane Leach, who began to resurrect Eastman's music and his legacy. Her work culminated in the anthology Gay Gorilla, Julius Eastman and His Music, which featured contributions from David Borden, Kyle Gann, Renee Levine Pecker, and Leach herself. It remains the most substantial research into Eastman's music to date. At this point, I'd like to ask you to open the first supporting document entitled Score Excerpt. Here you can see an excerpt from the piece that I earlier mentioned and the one that we will perform, which has since become one of his most recognized works. Even at an initial glance, the score is difficult to decipher. On the first page, we see several staves of alternating number of notes separated by brackets, black note heads without rhythmic values that contrast what to be half notes, a lack of a time signature or a metronome marking, no indication of what instruments should be used in performance, and what appear to be several time markings scattered throughout the music. One of the challenges of realizing Eastman's music is that deciphering these cues is dependent on the resources of those with whom Eastman performed, as well as his own recorded remarks on his music. Luckily, one of Eastman's fellow performers, Joseph Kubera, is still alive and has provided a guide to this work that can be reliably juxtaposed to other scores. In David Borden's essay from Gay Gorilla, he cites Kubera's instructions as follows. The tempo is about metronome equals 144, 4 black note heads equaling 1 beat. Every musician must have a stopwatch to follow the progress of the piece. There is usually a sense of pulse, except in the long lines of uninterrupted streams of black note heads. No rests or separations between the time delineated section. The general rule is that any of these lines must be played in any octave, high or low. I did note some places in the recording where players seem to play only in the written octaves, but this may have been only coincidence. The other melodic fragment is what I call the Continuo Figure, which sounds like a figured bass pattern and can be seen best at time 130. It always has the same notes and always the 8 iterations of each note in the sequence. It is usually played in octaves chosen by the pianist only once, with the last D repeated continuing until the end of that time segment. The Continuo Figure is usually begun upon cue from the leader. This is the shouted 1, 2, 3, 4 in the recording. It could have been conducted, but since Julius was one of the 4 pianists, he was always busy playing and so had to shout out the bar for nothing. With these instructions, we can easily answer the questions posed earlier. A very quick tempo, similar to what one would expect from an energetic jazz compo, again, revealing his brother Jerry's musical influence. A clear rhythm of 4 black note heads equaling 1 beat, meaning that the first line of the piece can be read in 2 measures of 4/4. The staves may be alternated and freely interchanged, and the time markings must be performed in a specific time frame, with each performer keeping track. The only question remains as to what the instrumentation might be. Here, we can rely on Eastman's own words, taken from a spoken introduction to a performance at Northwestern University in 1980. This piece can be played by any number of instruments. If melody instruments are used, a good number would be somewhere in the area of maybe 10 to 18 instruments, usually of the same family. A hypothetical version could be for 18 stringed instruments. Thus, like many other works in the minimalist canon, such as Louis Andriesen's Workers' Union and Frederick Jevsky's Coming Together, the exact orchestration is up to the determination of the performer. This work is usually performed by 2 to 4 pianists, although other configurations are possible, as Eastman suggests. This question of orchestration and performance practice will greatly impact the next segment of the presentation, which will explain ways in which one can perform his music and program it. In this portion of my presentation, I will discuss the ways in which it is possible to perform and program Eastman's music. Here, I will issue a mild trigger warning as we delve into the issues pertinent to Eastman's life, such as drug abuse, addiction, and mental illness, as well as issues in modern society, such as societal upheaval in wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. Please refer to the document entitled Sample Programs. One, although perhaps extreme, way to perform Eastman's music is in a multi-concert festival or symposium dedicated solely to his output. I say extreme not only because of the titles, but because of the general tone of his music is intense and demands concentration from both the performers and the listeners. In this context, an ambitious program could include his chamber piece, Stay On It, where the influence of jazz from his brother Jerry is most apparent, also The Holy Presence of Joan of Arc, and one of his pieces for 4 pianos. In a festival setting, one could also supplement the concerts with a lecture series on mental health and the effects of substance abuse on either a certain demographic or, more generally speaking, the creative process. This would allow for the necessary context to display his controversial titles without censorship. For universities that have an established new music series or a history of collaboration between their composition and performance areas, such a festival would be a worthy undertaking and certainly broaden understanding and appreciation of Eastman's music. As stated earlier in my presentation, the majority of Eastman's musical output belongs squarely in the minimalist and post-minimalist style. Eastman's preferred nomenclature was organic music, taken to mean music from which many new parts grow freely and exponentially, but always retain connection to the original material. In this context, I suggest that the most accessible way to program Eastman's music is to do it in the context of a genre that I call protest minimalism. Earlier in my presentation, I referenced two works, Andreessen's Workers' Union, composed in 1975, and Rzewski's Coming Together, composed in 1971. Beyond the obvious fact that each work was written in relatively proximity to one another, each carries a clear political subtext. In Andreessen's case, the obvious comment is on union rights. Rzewski's composition references the infamous and bloody Attica prison riot in 1971, and finally, Eastman's compositions employ racially charged language in their titles, possibly invoking the social unrest of the 1960s and 70s during the civil rights movement, and also as a protest against the established concert procedure. Transforming an aspect of the composition that has historically been used in a somewhat perfunctory manner, or at least with mild creativity, such as Sonata No. 1 or Suite Bergamesque, into something that uses what is commonly accepted as a vitriolic racial slur, forces the audience to confront such an extreme juxtaposition in the concert hall, and also forces them to confront and reconsider their own biases. Finally, Eastman's music can always be presented in the context of other BIPOC composers, as his varied works fit myriad themes. In summary, there are significant challenges to realizing Eastman's scores, including confronting the complicated themes in his music and addressing the extraordinarily provocative titles. However, this is not only the challenge that he presented to us, but the challenge that art presents to society. In my opinion, great art never apologizes, never succumbs, and never settles for anything less than what it is. Despite Eastman's rejection by the establishment during his short but productive life, he is now gaining rightful recognition as a visionary composer who refused incrementalism in his music and bravely reinvented an entire musical genre, who, unlike so many other academic composers of the time, embraced popular styles as an essential part of the creative process, and even in the face of systemic discrimination, substance abuse, and homelessness, produced a body of work that will surely stand the test of time. Thank you for watching. 1, 2, 3, 4.